in the meantime, we want to make sure we get all these developments in. We're going to do that right now with our friend, national security expert and retired Marine intelligence officer, Hal Kempfer, and Hal joins me now. Hal, good to see you. Thanks for being with us here. I want to put this tweet up here from Barak Ravid at Axios. Just to reemphasize the point, Netanyahu says no ceasefire in Gaza without the release of our hostages. And so we have been reporting today that North Gaza now cut off from South Gaza. And Hal, you and I were talking offline that essentially the duration, the length of this war, seemingly indefinite. Both sides dug in, not seeming to want an end to this anytime soon. Is that your overall view of where things stand a month and a day on, Hal?
Andrew, in a way, Israel is basically setting expectations that this could be a very long war, saying, in so many words that it could last not days or weeks, but probably looking into months, which is very realistic, particularly if you look at the aftermath of whatever will be primary or main combat operations, such as what we're seeing in Gaza City now. Hamas, interestingly, their spokesman in Qatar, basically was talking about a permanent war with Israel. And that was a rather stunning statement, interview, if you will, where he talks about this reopening. Basically, he says this puts Palestine back on the table, that there'll be a permanent war with Israel. He's hoping that all the Arab countries will line up behind them on this. And even went so far to say, we have no interest in governing Gaza. Our only interest is in war with Israel, which really was revealing, rather stunning. And I think in the long run, that's going to kind of set them back, that he sort of showed the hand, if you will, of Hamas intent with the war in Gaza.
Yeah, and Hal, let's talk about as well the humanitarian pauses itself. It seems like, and we were talking offline, that there was somewhat of a pause only briefly in the conflict. And so what does that mean? So has it already happened? And what happened during that said pause, if anything?
What's interesting is when they talk about the humanitarian pauses, we've been talking about maybe a 3-day ceasefire that's been kicked around. But Secretary Blinken, the White House, has basically been talking about humanitarian pauses. And as you recall, a few days ago, Netanyahu made it clear that they were all actually interested in doing some sort of humanitarian pause as well. Today, we may have seen what that may look like. They had a fairly significant southern movement going from the northern area, Gaza City, into that southern safe zone. And that zone, that road, and everything around it where people were moving south was basically essentially a no-fire area for the IDF. And it really did, as some remarked, it really looked kind of like an operational pause or humanitarian pause in order to allow civilians to get out of harm's way into an area that was safer. And that kind of goes with what Prime Minister Netanyahu has talked about, that within a limited time period and space, meaning geography on the ground, that there would be a humanitarian pause. So technically, that may have been a humanitarian pause of sorts. Israel says they've had a number of pauses throughout the conflict, but that may be what they look like in the future. And I'm sure once they have basically secured more firmly that northern area, we might see that pause space, if you will, the geography maybe extend a little bit.
Hal, aside from the Israel-Hamas war, really, I think the headline today has to do with U.S. forces in the region and our response. Let's just let our viewers know, if they don't already, we're going to do a 4-part tweet thread that Jackie Heinrich, Fox News White House correspondent, tweeted out the statement from the Defense Department today. Secretary of Defense Austin saying this: U.S. strikes back today at President Biden's direction. U.S. military forces conducted a self-defense strike on a facility in eastern Syria used by Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and affiliated groups. It goes on to say the strike was conducted by 2 U.S. F-15s against a weapons storage facility This precision self-defense strike is a response to a series of attacks against U.S. personnel in Iraq and Syria by IRGC Quds Force affiliates. It goes on to say this: the president has no higher priority than the safety of U.S. personnel, and he directed today's action to make clear that the United States will defend itself, its personnel, and its interests, ending by saying this: the United States is fully prepared to take further necessary measures to protect our people and our facilities. We urge against any escalation. U.S. personnel will continue to conduct counter-ISIS missions in Iraq and Syria. Hal, we were just talking about this the same time last night. I had asked you, do we need to ramp up some of our retaliatory actions against some of these proxies? Maybe they were listening to our conversation, Hal, but that is what happened today.
Yeah, I'm sure they were. I'm sure they hang on every word we say. Yes, they did. It was a good target. I've been there many times when you're trying to figure out what would be an appropriate target that needs to be hit, and how you're going to hit it, and what you're going to hit it with. And this was an appropriate target. I'm sure it's one that they've known for quite some time. And of course, I have to tell you, if you hit an ammunition depot, you usually get a lot of sympathetic detonations. So you have a fairly catastrophic effect across the entire area when you do that. And that may have been one of the reasons they did that, is because they want to make a big statement. Well, you hit an ammunition depot, you'll make a big statement. So that may have been it. Now, one thing I would point out is that they may have a limited number of planes on that they can use for close air support. And so this may have been one they needed some lead time on in order to get the right planes with the right munitions to hit the target. And so they kind of bought that lead time a little bit, and hence it was a more stationary target. One of the problems with some of these little militia units that launch drones or rockets, and when I was in Iraq, they were much less sophisticated than they are now.
Okay.
It's a roll out there, pull everything out of a vehicle, launch onto the base, and then they're gone. So you basically have this very limited window where if you can identify the target, you can get something on it. So you look for some of these bigger targets, which frankly don't always avail themselves that well. This one happened to obviously do that. I think they're probably going to be looking at moving more tactical resources for that quick response.
Okay.
Time on target sort of thing.
All right, Hal, just lastly too, because this is a great segue. This is somewhat of the same piece today, because I thought this was quite stunning. We have some video as well. Let's talk about this MQ-9 Reaper drone, Hal, that we now know Yemen-based Houthi rebels shot down this drone. This is a $32 million American piece of hardware, Hal. And a senior U.S. defense official confirmed today that the Iranian-backed Houthis shot down this drone near the Yemeni coast. A senior official told Fox News, Hal, this, quote, "We can confirm that a U.S. military MQ-9 remotely piloted aircraft was shot down off the coast of Yemen by Houthi forces there." So does this surprise you, Hal? I mean, the capabilities of the Houthis there in Yemen, that they could do this. And we were just talking, Hal, mere seconds ago about the response on attacks by Iranian-based proxies. This is quite belligerent here. Do you think they knew what they were shooting down, or was this inadvertent, or was this blatant?
No, I think it was absolutely intentional, and I don't know. As you know, I was just in that part of the world not too long ago, and I am familiar with what we do out of that part of the world, and that's very likely that may have been where the drone actually came from. Was where I was at, and I don't want to say it, but we may have gotten to a predictable pattern with some of our reconnaissance flights, and if you recall, that's always a danger with any military operation. Is you do something over and over again, it works fine, you just keep doing it. Well, you make yourself vulnerable because people are watching. That was the essence of the Black Hawk Down situation in Somalia. We got very predictable, and of course, they shot down a number of our helicopters. In this case, I'm not quite sure what the situation is. I don't know if there was a routine on when they were doing this. It does say a lot about what the Houthi rebels are able to do, and frankly, I'm personally looking at the Houthi capability in a new light. I knew they were doing some fairly long-range strikes from Yemen, from where they are in that western part of Yemen on the coast with the Red Sea. They were doing some fairly significant long-range strikes into Saudi Arabia, into the UAE. That's a long distance out there. And then we shot down with cruise missiles, as they said. I don't know if they were actual cruise missiles, but cruise missiles and drones going up to Israel. And then a few days ago, Israel shot down a Houthi missile 62 miles up in altitude in space.
Wow.
Which was a pretty impressive air defense move by the Israelis. But it says the Houthis are putting missiles that are firing that high of an apogee going into Israel. The Houthis have some capabilities. And I think it's going to make us reassess that. And I think we're going to reassess our vulnerability in the Bab el-Mandeb Strait area because of what the Houthi rebels have shown that they can do with air defense missiles. And we already know they have anti-ship missiles. So we're going to have to rethink this a little bit in terms of that threat situation down there.
All right. Hal Kempfer, as always, like I said, this part of the world is very active, very dangerous at the moment, and we'll continue to cover it here. Hal, thanks so much.
Thank you, Andrew.